And there are two classes of PFASs that are very, very large. They are called PFOA and PFOS. There will be no quiz. All right, now, you see the yellow line? Wherever the lines cross is a carbon molecule. And carbon molecules have 4 bonds. So if you look in the middle of the chain, a carbon is bonded to 2 other carbons and to 2 fluorides sitting there, okay? And the carbon on the far right-hand side of that is bonded to 1 carbon, and then it has a double bond O and an OH, okay? That's why that's a carboxylic acid, and hence that's a PFOA. The PFOS has a polysulfonyl group, and that's a polyfluoral alkyl sulfonic acid. Okay, so that's and the significance of this is that there are these things can be very long, they can have all sorts of attachments to them, and I will continue here. They are a class of between 12,000 and 15,000 chemicals, varying on source that you look at, often used to make products resistant to water stains, heat, some other things that I will get through in my introduction. They're also found in a wide range of commonly used products, such as microwavable popcorn bags, paper packaging, fast food wrappers, etc. The chemicals are ubiquitous and linked at low levels of exposure to cancer, thyroid disease, kidney dysfunction, low sperm counts, birth defects, autoimmune disease, and other serious health problems. They are called forever chemicals because I already told you why that's true. The microbial decomposers have no historical experience with these compounds. And so once they're out there, they're going to stay. The chemicals are thought to be contaminating drinking water for at least 200 million Americans that I'll talk about later. And the watchdogs have identified thousands of industrial polluters. Similar widespread contamination exists throughout the world. All right, I did a Google Scholar search on PFAS, just PFAS. In 2022, there were 21,400 hits. Okay, so it's becoming, and this has become significant of late, and we'll get to why it's taken 60 or 70 years for this to come to the science information. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency toxicity base lists 14,735 unique PFAS chemical compounds. They include a whole variety of things. Some other categories that fit under here go by abbreviations like PFBA and things like that. So a hell of a lot of them are out there. Many of these compounds were used in the mid-20th century in products and on materials due to their enhanced water-resistant properties, such as within Teflon or aqueous film forming foam. If you've seen the ads on TV, if you were in the military and were exposed to fire foam, this is the basis for that. Only since the start of the 21st century has the environmental impact and toxicity to human and mammalian life been studied in depth. These are described as persistent organic pollutants because they remain and for a very long time, as we've mentioned. Residues have been detected in humans and wildlife, prompting concerns about impacts to health. According to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, exposure is linked to one known condition called dyslipidemia, which is an abnormally high cholesterol level in humans. Suboptimal antibody responses, meaning your vaccine won't be as good as protection as you want. Reduced fetal and infant growth, higher rates of kidney cancer, among other things. And I will list a whole variety as we go through this evening. All right, ChemSec is an international chemical secretariat, is a government-funded organization in Sweden. In 2002, to advocate in favor, that was founded in 2002, and they advocate in favor of stricter regulatory controls on potentially hazardous chemicals, and to work with businesses on reducing the production and use of these substances in the products and in the supply chain. They found 12 companies account for most of the world's production of PFASs. And names you'll recognize are 3M, Honeywell, BASF, Merck, and Bayer. Although 3M just this year announced that it would discontinue making PFASs in part because of regulatory remediation and the most expensive and remediation, which is the most expensive component of this, as I'll share with you in a second, followed by healthcare costs, biomonitoring. They mentioned that you can purchase a kilogram of typical PFAS for just under $21. But if you factor in the cost of remediation, the price spikes to almost $21,000 because of their forever nature. You can't burn them up because they're out there in the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So beyond profits and pollution, the analysis also provides a closer look on how chemicals are used across the economy and whether those uses are essential or non-essential. Banning non-essential uses would probably spell the end of the chemicals in most consumer goods and cut deeply into industry profits. So there's obviously going to be a push not to do that, right? All right, an article from Nature of August 3rd of this year from the European Chemical Agency in Helsinki. All right, again, some of this is the substances are all around us. They coat smartphone screen, waterproof clothing, stain-resistant textiles. They also used in microchips, jet engines, cars, batteries, medical devices, and refrigeration systems. The refrigerant in your car is likely R134A. Okay, I'll mention that in a moment. That's one of these kinds of compounds, or has stuff in it. They're extraordinarily useful. I like this. They're fluorine swaddled carbon chains. Let grease and water slide off textiles. They protect industrial equipment from corrosion and heat damage. Their strong bonds cannot be taken apart by natural processes. So this is from their report. So they escape from factories, homes, and vehicles into the environment. They add to the forever growing pollution problem by persisting. The February proposal from this group estimates that tens of thousands of tons of these chemicals escape annually in Europe alone. Several are now known to be toxic. They have been linked to cancer, damage to the immune system, and are now banned under national and international laws. Most, however, have not undergone toxicology assessments or have been linked to human health. A side note, there are estimates of about 6,000 chemicals that are used across the world that make up for 99% of the chemicals used in production and for us. Only a handful of those have been tested for toxicity. And I'll give you a few examples in a while. Let's see. Okay. Officials at this agency have submitted a plan to say that their persistence means they will inevitably build up until as yet unknown safe thresholds are crossed. We see that there is an unacceptable risk now, says Richard Lute, a policy advisor at the Dutch National Institute for Public Health and the Environment. There is no prospect of an instant ban. This group has been consulting on the idea before it takes a position. European legislatures are unlikely to plan a vote before 2025, and even the current proposal offers grace periods of more than a decade in some cases to allow manufacturers to develop alternative materials. Several permanent exemptions are also offered, including for fluorinated drugs such as Prozac, if you or know someone on it, and for materials used to calibrate scientific instruments. But taken as a whole, the idea to shrink PAF use to a minimum is what we are asking society to make quite a shift. We are asking to reverse it all, go back to the drawing tables and invent alternative solutions.
changes already underway for consumers. For example, the notoriety of toxic information has caused 100 companies and brands, including Apple, to pledge to phase out PFASs, even before it's clear whether other materials can do the same job. For industrial users, however, the idea of life without PFAS is more shocking. February's proposal has ignited debate about which uses of fluorinated compounds the world could leave without, which must stay. Fluorine compounds are really incredibly strange in this regard, says Mark McLuden, a chemical engineer at the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder. Certain fluorine compounds are incredibly toxic. And then you have things like the gas R134A, which I've already mentioned, which is benign enough that you're shooting it directly in your lungs if you use an asthma inhaler. March 14th, the Environmental Protection Agency on Tuesday proposed the first federal limits on harmful forever chemicals in drinking water. Long-awaited protection, the agency said, will save thousands of lives and prevent serious illnesses, including cancer. Why now? Well, the lower half of that sheet I gave you shows you a map that appeared in the paper from the U.S. survey. They conducted a national reconnaissance to compare human exposures in unregulated private wells and regulated public supply tap water. Again, 716 locations, the distributions on that sheet. Across the U.S. was collected in between 2016 and 2021. PFASs were assessed by 3 different laboratories and compared with land use and potential source metrics to explore drivers of contamination. They estimate that at least one of these compounds could be detected in 45% of the U.S. drinking water samples. Another why, and in March 14th of this year, the Kansas Reflector even had an article about the limits to forever chemical testing in drinking water. They reported that in Barber County, Rural Water District number 2, they tested for more than 20 of these compounds. And one happened to be 30 times the level considered safe by the current EPA standards. Again, no rules.
Is that Medicine Lodge? Is that in Barber County?
Medicine
Lodge?
Pardon me?
Is Medicine Lodge, I think, is Barber County?
I think it's southeast. It's,
Okay.
Which down there,
Right.
Cherokee, things like that. All right, another example. Here's an example that we have not talked about. Forever chemicals may reduce fertility in women by up to 40%. Appeared in Health, Journal Health, 23 March by Mike McRae. A new study led by these researchers, this is from the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, uncovered evidence in a sample of women in Singapore linking plasma concentrations of these substances with an increase in difficulty to become pregnant. PFAS can disrupt our reproductive hormones and have been linked with delayed puberty onset and increased risks of endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome in a few previous studies. That was a quote. Says the new study's senior author, environmental epidemiologist. What the study adds is that PFAS also decreases fertility in women who are generally healthy and naturally trying to conceive. The impressive thing about this is they recruited more than 1,000 volunteers in Singapore who were basically healthy. And over the following several years, they discovered that of those who wanted to become pregnant, it was a 40% decrease in their findings compared to what is expected to be normal. Another study, the equitable comparisons across population subgroups. And here they used a mixed item response theories, which occurred in a American Chemical Society publication in August of this year. And they looked at socio-demographic, dietary, and behavioral characteristics in its algorithm, which makes it more sensitive to exposure differences among cultures than standard methods used by our government and other science across the world. The median level of these substances was 88% higher for Asian Americans than non-Hispanic whites, the research showed, a finding that more commonly used methods would miss. However, fish is a major source of PFAS exposure, that's known, and it's thought that populations with higher levels of seafood intake in their diet will tend to have higher levels of PFAS. It gets better, folks. The next example came from actually an article in the Guardian, June of this year. The URL lists has chemicals PFAS low birth weight obesity research. Forever chemicals can lead to low birth weight and obesity in later life. A review published found that in the PFAS in umbilical cord blood in almost 30,000 samples collectively checked at Brown University. So the stuff is in us. There's no getting around it. Since 1993, a group called the Environmental Working Group has shined a spotlight on outdated legislation, harmful agricultural practices, and industry loopholes that pose a risk to our health and in the health of our environment. They are a 501c3 that has a $13 million budget advocating for environmental protection in Washington. And in February of this year, they examined dozens of peer-reviewed studies that show that more than 120 unique compounds have been detected in a wide range of wildlife. This includes many types of fish, birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals, large and small, aquatic creatures, pandas, tigers, squirrels, cats, otters, dolphins, you name it. More than 330 animal species around the world are at risk from exposures to toxic chemicals, according to this group. One study considered including an analysis suggests that cardinals are exposed to these substances from the soil, groundwater, and air, with 12 different compounds found in their blood serum. So they're getting it, right? And we're not feeding it to them, but they're getting it. See, I lost my place here. Sea turtles in the North Pacific, it is known that PFAS concentrations impact their eggs and their immune systems. All right, so it's a wide world problem for animals and plants, and I haven't mentioned plants yet, and a Google search on plants came up in PFAS, came up with 17,000 publications between 2017 and 2022. And the studies, however, deal with other things dealing with PFAS, including how they're absorbed, how they're metabolized, their toxicity, reproduction, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so how do PFASs get into our food? This came from Salon from May 16th of this year. A long, very long article with a lot of science references. It started off by saying 80% of Americans have the herbicide Roundup or glyphosate in their urine, which, surprise. I happen to know that Roundup, some versions of it come with a surfactant. And guess what surfactants are? They are PFASs, okay? My farmer neighbor, when I talk to him, he buys his glyphosate a little less expensive. It doesn't have the surfactant. But he puts a quart of surfactant into every, I forget how many gallons he puts in this big spray tank, okay? So what happens? This is surfactant make things get on the plant easier to control weeds. It absorbs easier, and it is not metabolized by the plant because these last forever, right? So the plant is sending these through its system. It's got corn, it's going to land up in the corn head, it's going to land up in the soybean, and suddenly it shows up in the ear of corn you may have for supper tonight, or in the soybean meal that's in your energy drink, in the soy oil that you're cooking in, or making somebody, or Walmart, or McDonald's is making the French fries in. So that's how we get exposed to these things through our food. All right, I mentioned soybean, and I'm gonna take a short break from the PFAS story and talk about some others, okay? And specifically the soybean. And this story starts when, by the way, I didn't tell you this early, but I've been collecting soybean influences on human reproduction since about for over 10 years now. I haven't given a talk on this, but soybeans are known to have a hormone mimic. They have an estrogen mimic in them. And one of the articles I found early on, it was talking about a correlation between the presence of hormone mimics in pregnant women and a mammalian birth defect in the genitals. And the mammalian birth defect is called, since I can never remember the damn, hypospadias. This is a condition where on the penis, instead of having the urine exit at the end of the penis, the urethra is found along the shaft and in certain cases at the base of the scrotum. So it never reproduces and develops to the point where it's supposed to be. And they found this correlated with high estrogen mimics in pregnant women. All right, so this is my first appointment with Dr. Heitman about the same time. When Wright retired, I go to him, and if you don't know him, he's willing to talk to you. And well, what are you doing these days? Well, bingo, it's a medical issue. I says, what do you know about this? And he sits there and looks at me and he says, funny you should mention that. When I first started out, I would see 1 or 2 cases a year of this. And for those of you who don't know, I spent years at Fort Riley. And he said at Fort Riley, I saw 1 or 2 cases a month. And so 15 years between the time all those young people who were having kids were also collecting estrogen mimics. And estrogen is important in male development because it's a balance between estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. All those things have to operate smoothly, otherwise things go amiss. All right, so we have one of the others is estrogen mimic in the environment, and there's nothing we're doing about it. The second item I want to talk about, bisphenol A. That's bisphenol A, as it's on the back of the sheet. And let's see. It is able to be broken down a little bit better than the PFASs because it's made from phenol and acetone, I believe, that condenses. And it's used in plastics. It's used in a lot of plastics. And basically it leaches out of the plastic. So if you have a water bottle, cookware, plastic glass, etc., bisphenol A. All right. Let's see now. Let me go back here. An average level of BPA in U.S. adult urine was 95.7% of the sample had 1.24 micrograms per liter of this stuff. Okay, it amounts insignificant, but the point is it's present.
Yes,
it's universal. That was in a National Health and Nutrition Examination survey in 2013 and 14. September 16th article of this year in Science Alert spoke to a European food safety organization, tested these in 11 European countries in slightly under 3,000 adults, and they found 92% of those folks had this in this urine. So it's worldwide. Recently, the European Union lowered the safety level of BPs by a factor of 20,000 to 0.2 parts per billion. That's 20,000 fold decrease from what they were being used. So these things are getting recognized, okay, but it's still, all right. And the very last one I want to talk about in terms of others, how many of you know what aspartame is? Aspartame is a sugar substitute, right? Yeah. Well,
probably the most.
I'm sorry.
I think the most famous one are those frequently used artificial sweetener.
Yeah.
The most frequently used artificial sweetener. I think it's aspartame.
Aspartame, okay, all right, well, recently, the World Health Organization said it's a probable carcinogen, okay? And the study that in September of this year, what a week or so ago, talked about feeding mice an equivalent substance based on their weight to the amount that is accepted for a human adult of aspartame. They fed those mice for 3 weeks and then tested them in maize, in a maize situation. And they found that these mice that were on aspartame took them a heck of a lot longer that they were able to do it. Their cognitive, that they were less able to move around, they were slightly agitated, but they did do it, but it just took them longer, okay? They then took these mice that were treated and had them cross with normal mice that were never treated. And guess what? The progeny of that those offspring had the same problem. And that lasted for 2 generations.
Well, you're full of good news.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is reality.
No, yes,
This
yes.
is not Fox News or anything like that. This is reality. I apologize. It gets worse.
Yeah, epigenetic or transfer of chemical.
What's that?
Epigenetic or.
Epigenetic, yes,
Okay.
and good point. Is this, the offspring had no exposure to this. I mean, once they went off it, they bred in 2 generations. So it's an epigenetic. Yeah, thank you, Richard. I could have turned this into a 3-hour one, but I'm still trying to go. All right, June 21st, editorial in Science.
Yes.
I gotta make sure I didn't pass anything. Okay, all right, this is an editorial of Science, premier science magazine. Let's see, and it had to speak about we mentioned this a little bit, the persistence of their forever status in nature. Quote, it may seem that persistent chemicals are inert and thus relatively benign. However, they still have many ways to interfere with an organism's physiology and cause adverse effects. Therefore, persistence is a property that makes the toxicity of any chemical much worse because it leads to, as long as uses and corresponding emissions are ongoing, ever increasing concentrations, and toxic effects will manifest at some point. In other words, persistent acts as a multiplier of toxicity. This stuff keeps accumulating. We haven't gotten rid of it in our environment. We're doing a few things. So anyway, very, and this insidious aspect of persistence has been underestimated in chemical assessment for a long time. And now in this case, it has hit home. All right, I talked about in my introduction a lot of things going on. So what to do or what is being done now is going to be the last portion of this. And we spoke about the EU proposing bans and some corporations like Apple making changes now. And a very long piece from the Washington Post of June 5th this year is a history from the experience of Stephen and Sandra Swanson in Washington State. They were eating dinner beside their Christmas tree in 2017 when a Navy official rang the doorbell with alarming news. Hazardous chemicals from firefighting foam used during training exercise at the military airstrip have seeped into their well water. We were, quote, we were told, don't drink the water, it's toxic. Then we were handed bottled water from Safeway. Stephen Swanson, a 78-year-old retired emergency room physician, said in an interview from his home on Whidbey Island, Washington, it felt like a gut punch. Months later, Swanson provided the Washington State Legislature with tests showing his blood was filled with high levels of contaminant found in the foam, commonly called PFAS or forever chemicals, because they don't break down, as we know. His testimony helped convince the state legislature in Washington in 2008 to become the first in the nation to restrict the use of firefighting foams that contain these kinds of chemicals, which numerous studies have linked to cancer, infertility, and a host of other things. Since then, at least 106 similar laws have been enacted in 24 states, many with GOP dominated legislatures, which surprised me, but to ban or restrict the use of these chemicals that are valued for their waterproofing, non-stick, fire-resistant properties, and found in a vast array of everyday kind of products, including carpeting, rugs, outdoor apparel, and stick-proof cookware. An article in Science Alert then spoke, this same Washington Post article talked about the URL, and here it was written by Carly Casella. Secretly held documents from the two most prominent manufacturers of forever chemicals show that industry leaders knew of the harmful health effects of some of these substances long before they told the public. For at least 24 years, 24 company leaders at DuPont, the maker of Teflon, and 3M, the maker of Scotchgard, sat on seriously concerning results. In internal research, two of their most popular chemicals, called PFOS and PFOA, were proving to have all of the adverse health effects that government officials were not made aware of. Only in 1998, when DuPont was sued for dumping 7,000 tons of this stuff in laced sludge into the Ohio River, did the company's secrets come to light. Now, a small sampling of company documents from DuPont and 3M spanning 1991 to 2006 has allowed researchers to assemble a timeline of deception. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to let you have this and look at it at your own. This is a list that came from this publication. Thank you. And these documents were initially obtained, and again, the documents create the timeline. Were obtained by the attorney John Robert Beloit, who successfully sued DuPont for the contamination in the early 2000s. Most recently, the corporate documents were donated to researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, by the producers of a 2018 investigative documentary on DuPont called The Devil We Know. And I kept meaning to look at either Netflix or Amazon had this, like The Devil We Know. Having access to these documents allows us to see what the manufacturers knew and when, but also how polluting industries kept critical public health information private. Stated a public health researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. This research is important to inform policy and move us forward towards a precautionary rather than a reactionary principle of chemical regulation. Timeline of industry secrets revealed by documents are the last two figures from the Annals of Global Health, current publication by Grammar. Chemical regulations in the U.S. are usually made in hindsight, putting public health at risk. All too often, novel materials are manufactured first and tested for toxicity only after they appear in the market. The harms of this approach are more than evident when looking at the history of these forever chemicals. Since the 1940s, this class of chemicals has been used in non-stick cookware, fabric treatment, cosmetics, and food packaging. In the early 2000s, they were finally phased out of production in the US, but by then they had already spread far and wide. At first, DuPont, 3M claimed they were biologically inert, but investigative reporting and legal disclosures now show that industry leaders knew what wasn't true for many years. In 1970, internal documents revealed that PFOA was highly toxic when inhaled and moderately toxic when ingested. They had people at their employee come down with all sorts of respiratory diseases, and women who were working had birth defects and abortions and all sorts of things from these. As far back as 1971, the chief of toxicology at Teflon quoted, "The ability to increase the size of the liver of rats at low doses and should be handled with extreme care, and contact with skin should be strictly avoided." Later in the 1980s, learned of the pregnant workers exposed at DuPont. And even in 1991, DuPont denied any adverse health effects. It took 30 years after industry knowledge for the first peer-reviewed papers to connect birth defects to PFASs in the scientific literature. To this day, over 90% of pregnant people in the US continue to be exposed to potentially harmful chemicals. And even minor traces of some of these things can cause health effects. The US EPA recently dropped the safety guidelines for these substances in drinking water, which is significant, from 70 parts per trillion to 0.02 parts, a 3,500-fold decrease in the accepted levels in drinking water.
Trillion.
Trillion?
With a T. Trillion.
Trillion, yes, parts per trillion.
That's almost zero.
Parts per trillion, yeah. To this day, the University of California points out that there are no federal enforceable limits on any of these chemicals established in the US at this point.
There's no federally enforceable.
There is no federal legislation that makes this enforceable in any way, shape, or form. Let's see. History, so anyway, this is no different than what the tobacco industry did, and we know that story. All right, I have a 919 also. Environmental epidemiology researchers analyzed data collected by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and found that women exposed to these compounds, they listed, had higher odds of being diagnosed with cancers of the breast, ovary, skin, and uterus. Okay, researchers again at the University of now this is another paper. University of California, University of Michigan, University of California, Southern California, exposure to a variety of these compounds had a doubling or near doubling odds of a previous melanoma diagnosis. So there may be for a particular PFAS called PFNA, an elevated risk of uterine cancer, women with higher exposures to BPA, which is used and are found in many dyes, higher odds of previous. Anyway, what now people are focusing on are the specific. They were looking at the big ones, and we already know what's going on there. Now they're looking at the minor ones and still finding a relationship. The bipartisan infrastructure law signed by Joe Biden in 2021 allocated $9 billion to mitigate contamination in U.S. drinking water systems. However, other congregational efforts to limit and mediate contamination have died under intense lobbying from the chemical industry. I think it's a little too late for us for a lot of these things. I mean, we have all these chemicals, and by the way, I think I told you we have about 6,000 that are being used worldwide in large numbers, and only a handful have been tested. So, what are the solutions? Well, remediation is costly. We know that it's almost 100 times more than a kilogram of one of these things costs to get rid of it. We haven't done toxicity studies on most of these things. Corporate losses have to be considered because of our economy. I mean, they're using these things, they're doing a particular function. How do you find a safe substitute for that? By the way, it's in toothpaste too. Some of your toothpaste is foamy, it's there. Any of you use rinse agent in your dishwasher?
Yes.
I would not. I discovered when I found that out, I stopped using it. The dishes come out of the dishwasher with no spots on them, even with city water. We may be getting it from city water for all we know.
Well, city water.
Okay, and then we have a variety of social issues to confront in order to get anything done. People believe, the Fox News mentality. They suck the mammalian stupidity tit because there's nothing there. They don't support education. They don't support vaccines. They don't support public health. They believe in phony things. They don't believe masks help. I mean, anyway, and unfortunately, our modern technology is helping these negatives about doing anything spread instantaneously. And the people who glom onto it, I mean, and so. And the, you know, the anti-climate, it goes along with the anti-climate issue that we're facing. I mean, what are we doing about it? They're arguing that it's normal and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. Anyway, thank you for
And was very, yeah. Can I add, back with DDT, we had the problem with the eagles and the eggs and that kind of thing. But the eagle wasn't eating DDT, it was the insects, the fly, the mammals. And as it goes up, because DDT was so stable, it didn't break down. And as a result, we call it biological magnification. So when something eats something, it should eventually be broken down, but it isn't. And then you eat 10 mice and you got what they had, and then the next one up, and it concentrates. And this is the problem with the radiation being released in Fukushima. It's really super low, not quite as low as that trillion, but real low. But the concern that China has
in the microscopic organisms, they're eaten by the bigger ones, and then the bigger fish, and then the bigger fish, and
and it gets magnified.
the tilapia has it.
Yeah, so that's the reason that's the problem there. But we have a problem because we're divided into 50 states. And something like this, you talked about Washington State did something, but at the federal level, we really, you know, what's in the Constitution and so forth determines it. If it's not there, it belongs to the state. And because we're a federal system, we're broken up. Other countries don't have a federal system, and when the top says we can do this, then they do it. Then that gives them much more power.
You know, again, I still haven't done a presentation on estrogen mimics, and I probably won't, because it's the same story, only there.
Yeah.
The title of that was going to be The Decreasing Male.
Yeah.
Because these estrogen mimics make males less male-like.
Yeah.
And consequently, the sperm count, I mean, some estimates say that in 1980, it's gone down by 50%.
Easily.
And what's the future there? Artificial, you know, insemination, and collect your sperm for 2 months and save it up. But, and so all those things, to me, as a biologist, I'm not painting a futuristic positive picture for humanity. We're doing all these things that are biologically, we're not having enough generations to adapt. I mean, because adaptation, it gives biology a chance to deal with it. And anyway,
if you had a bacteria or something that you were able to engineer so it could start breaking down some of these chemicals that can't be broken down, you have the potential for another problem. It can break down those. It might be able to break down something that was very valuable that we need and produce toxins.
well,
So
that's
this is
a good point. Yeah, no, I agree. And
engineer out of it.
yeah, and yet, again, this is in the water, it's in the soil, it's in everything now. And, you know, I just had a brain fart. I just I looked at a paper, a headline. There's some evidence now that high temperatures are influencing photosynthesis. And so, you know, our crops may be victimized by what's going on. And I haven't talked to my farmer neighbor. I was going to ask him how his beans are doing. I don't know. Anyway, no, at times like this, I almost feel sorry for my grandchildren inheriting this. And it's not my fault, it's not our fault, it's our society's fault that we have treated these things so nonchalantly, and they're coming back to haunt us.
When I think about this Teflon, how, oh wow, incredible,
That was, right?
fabulous, changes your life, it makes life better, clean up better, easier. Nothing.
I don't know, anyway,
Better living through chemistry. And I think there is a
Well,
lot.
that's a good, what company was that?
DuPont.
Yeah, better, I meant to bring that, another thing I was gonna
Hey,
add.
my dad was career DuPont,
Oh, was it? Yeah.
but on the nuclear, on the nuclear bomb side of
Yeah,
it.
Better
and King Reynolds was on the board
Is that,
of DuPont, and he still has.
I had a question about your map.
Oh.
And for those viewing at home, I noticed, I mean, there are population centers in the United States, for example, in East Texas and along the coast of California, and you certainly see some trouble spots. But it's Florida would be another one, very heavy population. Again, a few spots here and there, but the really heavy concentration is obviously in the Northeast corridor. Can you explain that?
No, I can't. This is taken directly out of the paper. They didn't give the criteria for samples. Outside of regulated and unregulated.
So it's possible the Northeast corridor is better about testing for it.
No, they did, this group, this was a US Geological Survey.
Okay,
They did the testing, as I recall.
all right.
So.
So it really is more heavily concentrated.
Yeah, you're right, it
Yeah.
is, and yet the fact that their estimates indicate that roughly half total water supplies in the country
Yeah,
indicate, so, and it makes sense, I mean, this stuff is percolating through the soil and anyway, but no, that, a good point, but
it's not correlating very well with population.
no, it's not, I agree.
California, right?
It should be California, Texas, and Florida should have huge concentrations, and they don't.
And yet they do have, they do have both public and private in Florida.
Yeah,
So, you know, the circles are public and the triangles are private. So they do have several along the west coast of Florida, up in the north east. And let's see. It looks like
Maryland is just covered with it.
I'm
You
sorry.
can't even see Maryland. It's just covered.
No, I see, and yet
New Jersey doesn't do it.
No,
there generally are higher populations out there too.
Look at Eastern Iowa.
yeah, I mean, it's just a cluster.
it is.
Right, that's right. Eastern
What
And I
I'm,
think that's the Mississippi River, right?
it is.
Quad City.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What I'm wondering is that where the manufacturing plants are? Is most of it getting into the water or
Yeah.
where have you? I mean, certainly there's post-consumer waste. You mentioned popcorn bags and so forth.
well.
But is it
and-
most
and
of it
again,
the
even in the
manufacturing?
foreign countries, they've
Yeah.
got, they've got that stuff they're putting on the soil, and it's not just hitting the plant, it's going in the soil. Which,
Yeah, forever, yeah. But you had mentioned something about water supply here, but we're one of the few places that has ozone,
that's correct.
and which is wonderful.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
just that, and only if it floods do they have to use a little chlorine,
Mhm.
but we are so lucky. But I do not know why the rest of the country doesn't do ozone. Because it is so much safer. It is a little more expensive, but it is so much better.
Yeah, oh, I agree, I
Yeah.
agree. No, when
And
my
what's-
daughter lived in the Fort Worth area, I couldn't drink the water in the restaurants, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and in Asia, oh, forget it. They're so crowded, yeah, the water has to be subsidized.
Very interesting. Depressing, but very interesting.
Well, it's reality.
Yeah.
But with all your.
See, now, you can buy distillers and distill your own water if you.